It was 2:47 in the morning. I know this because I checked my phone the moment it buzzed. That time is burned into my memory like a scar. Most people would ignore a call at that hour. I almost did, but something in my gut told me not to. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting for 4 decades to wake up. My name is David, and this is the story of the night everything changed. The night my brother came back from the dead. The phone screen lit up my dark bedroom. Unknown number. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. It was the middle of the night. My heart was already racing, that primal fear you feel when your phone rings in darkness. Bad news always comes after midnight, doesn't it? Nobody calls with good news at 2 a.m. I answered. Hello? My voice was rough with sleep, confused. There was silence. Just breathing on the other end, long, deliberate breathing, like someone was gathering courage, like someone was about to say something they'd been rehearsing for a very, very long time. David? The voice was thin, almost fragile, male, older maybe, but with something familiar underneath all those years of rust. My stomach dropped, actually physically dropped. I sat up in bed, my mind suddenly spinning through possibilities, rejecting them all as impossible. Who is this? I asked. But I already knew. Some part of me already knew, and that part was screaming. It's Tommy. He said it simply, like he was saying the most ordinary thing in the world. It's your brother. It's actually me. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The room started spinning, and I gripped the edge of my mattress like it was the only real thing left in the universe. I know this is crazy, Tommy continued, his voice shaking slightly. I know you probably think this is some kind of prank, or I don't even know what you'd think. But David, I'm alive. I've been alive this whole time, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I need your help. I need you to understand what happened. I need you to know the truth. My mouth was dry. My hands were shaking. 42 years. 42 years since Tommy disappeared. I was only 16 when it happened. He was 18, a senior in high school. The night he vanished, the whole world changed. My parents' world shattered. Mine did too. And now, in the darkness of my bedroom, a voice from the grave was asking me to listen. Where are you? I whispered. I can't say over the phone. Not yet. But David, listen to me carefully. I don't have much time. I need you to do something for me. I need you to find someone. Her name is Margaret Sutton. She was our neighbor back then. You remember her, right? The woman who used to bring Mom those casseroles? I did remember. Vaguely. A tall woman with red hair, always smiling, always there. Tommy, I don't understand what's happening right now. Where have you been? Why didn't you contact us before? Mom and Dad spent their entire lives. My voice cracked. I know, Tommy said, and I could hear the pain in those 2 words. Believe me, I know. And that's exactly why I'm calling you now instead of them. I couldn't face them. Not yet. Not until the truth comes out. Not until you understand. Because, David, I didn't disappear. I was taken. And the person who took me, they couldn't let me go. They couldn't risk me telling anyone what I knew. The line went quiet again. What do you mean you were taken? I asked. Who took you? I have to go, Tommy said urgently. I can't stay on this line, but I'm going to text you an address. It's a motel outside the city. Room 14. Come tomorrow night. Come alone. And before you come, I need you to find out everything you can about Margaret Sutton, her family, her secrets. You'll understand why when we meet. Tommy, wait, I started, but the line had already gone dead. For what felt like hours, I sat in the darkness, my phone clutched in my hand. I didn't go back to sleep. I couldn't. Instead, I turned on every light in my house and waited for dawn. When the text came through, just an address, nothing else, I stared at it for so long the words started to blur. 42 years. My brother had been gone for 42 years, and now, suddenly, he was back. And he was bringing secrets with him. Secrets that he'd kept hidden all this time. Secrets that someone had tried to bury. Secrets that were about to destroy everything. I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus. I couldn't pretend like my entire reality hadn't just shattered into a million pieces. My boss didn't even question it. He just said, "Feel better soon," and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, my hands hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know where to start. Margaret Sutton. It seemed impossible that a name I hadn't thought about in decades would suddenly hold the key to everything. I started with the basics: Google searches, social media, public records databases. It was 2024 now, not like the old days when information was harder to find. In about 15 minutes, I had a full picture of Margaret Sutton's life, or at least the public-facing version of it. She was 78 years old, still living in the same area. Well, she had moved to a nicer house about 20 years ago, but it was only 3 miles from where we grew up. She had married a man named Robert Sutton in 1985. They had 2 children. Her Facebook page was full of photos of grandchildren, beach vacations, garden club meetings. She looked happy, peaceful, like a woman without a care in the world. But underneath all those smiling photos, there had to be something else. Something Tommy knew, something worth keeping someone prisoner for 4 decades. I dug deeper. Court records, newspaper archives, digital back issues of the local paper. I was looking for anything connected to Margaret Sutton from the late 1970s and early 1980s. Anything unusual, anything that might explain why Tommy was terrified of her. That's when I found it. It was a small article, barely a paragraph in the police blotter section of the newspaper from 1982. 4 years after Tommy disappeared. An arrest report. Margaret Sutton had been arrested for embezzlement from the nonprofit organization where she worked as an accountant. She had stolen nearly $50,000 over the course of 5 years. But here was the strange part. The charges were dropped 3 weeks later. No explanation. No news story about why. Just gone. $50,000 in 1982. That was serious money. That was enough to destroy a person's life. But the charges had vanished, like someone had pulled strings. Like someone had made a phone call to the right person. My heart was pounding. I kept searching. I found something else. Tommy's missing person report. I had seen it before, of course, when we were younger, but I'd never really studied it carefully. It was simple, straightforward. An 18-year-old boy leaves for a drive and never comes home. The police searched for about 2 weeks, then the case went cold. There wasn't enough evidence of foul play. No ransom note, no body, no witnesses. After a while, people just moved on. People do. But there was one detail in that report I'd never paid close attention to before. Underneath the list of places Tommy had been seen before he disappeared, the gas station, the diner, the movie theater, was a name of someone who had been interviewed. Margaret Sutton. She claimed she saw Tommy driving down Maple Street around 6 p.m. that evening. She was certain of the time because she was heading home from her office. I sat back in my chair. My hands were trembling. Margaret Sutton. She had been there. She had seen him. And then Tommy vanished. And then 4 years later, when she tried to keep all that money she'd stolen, the charges somehow got dropped. Was it blackmail? Had Tommy somehow been the key to her silence? Or had she used him to get what she wanted? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You finding things?" It had to be Tommy, checking in, watching to see if I was doing what he asked. I typed back, "Who is Margaret to you? What did she do?" The response came almost immediately. Not over text. Tonight. Room 14. Come at 8 p.m. And David, don't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until you hear what I have to say. I looked at the clock. It was only 10 a.m. I had 10 hours to wait, 10 hours to spiral through my thoughts, 10 hours to imagine what my brother had been through, where he'd been, why he'd finally decided to reach out now after all these years. I went back to the laptop and kept searching. I found photos of Tommy from high school, the yearbook from his senior year. He was handsome in that casual, effortless way that kids can be. Big smile, natural looking, like he didn't know the camera was pointing at him. Underneath his photo, it said, Tommy Richards, football, drama club, future, unknown. Unknown. That was the cruelest irony. The yearbook had literally predicted his fate. I scrolled to Margaret Sutton's photo. She was in the yearbook too, but not as a student. She was listed as a staff member. English department. She was younger then, maybe 30. Red hair, like I remembered. But something in her eyes looked different in that photo. Harder. Like she was hiding something even then. The more I thought about it, the more pieces started to connect in ways that terrified me. What if Margaret Sutton had taken Tommy? Not to hurt him necessarily, but to keep him quiet about something. Something she knew. Something he'd witnessed or found out about. And what if all these years she'd kept him somewhere, locked away, hidden? But why would she keep him alive? Why not just leave him in the past where he belonged? Unless Tommy knew something that was still valuable to her. Unless he was still useful to her, even after all this time. I spent the rest of the day researching Margaret's family. Her husband, Robert, worked in insurance. Their kids went to good colleges. Everything about them was normal, ordinary, boring even. But underneath that boring exterior, there had to be something rotten. There had to be. As the sun started to set, I showered, changed clothes, and drove to the address Tommy had given me. The motel was exactly what I expected. A rundown place on the edge of the highway. The kind of place where people paid in cash and didn't ask questions. The kind of place where someone could hide. I pulled up to room 14. My hands were still shaking as I got out of the car. I knocked on the door. The door opened slowly, and there he was, Tommy. He looked almost exactly like I expected him to, and nothing like I expected him to. He was 60 years old now, older than I'd ever imagined he would be. His hair was gray. There were deep lines around his eyes, but his face was the same face from that yearbook photo. Just aged, just worn down by time and whatever else had happened to him. David, he said quietly. Thank you for coming. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, at my brother, the ghost that had haunted my entire life. Come inside, Tommy said, glancing over his shoulder nervously. We don't have much time. The motel room was sparse. A bed, a desk, a bathroom. It smelled like cigarettes and mildew. Tommy had a single duffel bag in the corner, like he was ready to leave at any moment. Sit down, Tommy said, gesturing to the bed. This is going to take a while. I sat. Tommy remained standing, pacing slowly back and forth like a caged animal. 42 years is a long time to hold something inside, Tommy began. A long time to be afraid. A long time to wonder if telling the truth would destroy everything, or if keeping it hidden would destroy me. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Margaret Sutton didn't take me by force. Not exactly. That's what I need you to understand. It wasn't like a kidnapping you'd see in a movie. It was something much more complicated than that. I waited for him to continue. I was 18, Tommy said. You remember how I was back then. Angry, confused. I felt like the whole world was wrong. Like everyone around me was lying about something. And I was curious about things kids probably shouldn't be curious about. I was trying to figure out who I was, you know. He sat on the edge of the desk across from me. Margaret was my English teacher that year, senior year. She was beautiful in that mysterious way that teachers sometimes are to their students, and she was different from the other teachers. She talked to us like we were adults. She told us to question authority. She told us to think for ourselves. I had a crush on her. I think half the boys in my class did. My stomach tightened. I didn't like where this story was going. One day after class, Tommy continued, she asked me to stay behind. She said she wanted to talk to me about a story I'd written for her class. It was dark. Honestly, looking back, it was pretty disturbing. It was about a kid who doesn't belong in his family, who dreams of running away. Tommy's voice got quieter. She told me that my writing was special, that I had a gift for expressing real emotion. And then she said something like, "You understand what it's like to not fit in, don't you?" And I did. I really did. And somehow she knew that. She saw something in me that I'd been hiding from everyone else. "Tommy," I said quietly. "What happened?" "She invited me to her house one day, after school. She said she wanted to show me some books, some writers she thought I'd be interested in. And I went. God help me, I was 18 and stupid, and I went." He rubbed his face with both hands. "At first it was innocent. We talked about books, we drank coffee, and then it wasn't innocent anymore. She kissed me, and I didn't stop her. Because I was 18, and I was confused, and I wanted someone to think I was special. And she did. She made me feel like I was the only person in the world who understood her." My heart was breaking, but I needed to hear the rest. "It became a secret thing," Tommy said. "For about 6 months, I'd go to her house after school. Sometimes in the evening. She made me feel grown up. She made me feel like I was the one person she could really talk to. She'd tell me things about her husband, about her life, about how trapped she felt." "Did anyone know?" I asked. "No one. I didn't tell you. I didn't tell my friends. It was our secret. But then, one day I found something. I was at her house and I saw some papers in her office. Documents. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. They were financial statements. Proof that she'd been stealing money from the nonprofit where she worked. Thousands of dollars." Tommy's jaw clenched. When I confronted her about it, she completely changed. The sweet teacher persona just vanished. She told me that what I'd seen was none of my business. She told me that I was just a stupid kid and that I should keep my mouth shut. But I was scared. I was 18 years old, and I'd just gotten involved in something way over my head. "So you tried to tell someone?" I asked. "I was going to. That night I disappeared, I decided I was going to go to the police, or to your parents, someone, anyone. I was driving around trying to work up the courage when she called me. She said she needed to see me one last time, that she wanted to explain, that she was sorry. And like an idiot, I went." Tommy walked to the window and stared out at the parking lot. "She wasn't sorry. She was scared. She told me that if I said anything to anyone, she'd make sure I disappeared. She had connections, she said. Friends who could make problems go away." And I believed her. I was terrified, so I told her I wouldn't say anything. I promised. "But you didn't go home," I said. "No." Because she didn't believe me. She said that I was a liability, that I knew too much, that the only way to ensure my silence was to keep me close, to keep me where she could control me. Tommy turned back to me, and there were tears in his eyes. She drove me to a property her husband owned, an old house about 40 miles out of town. She said it was temporary, just until things calmed down, just until she was sure I wouldn't say anything. But temporary turned into months, and months turned into years. The room felt like it was getting smaller. "She kept me there," Tommy said, "in a basement room. I wasn't chained up or anything. The door wasn't locked, but she'd threatened me. She'd told me that if I left, if I tried to contact anyone, she'd frame me for a crime. She'd say I was the one who assaulted her. She'd destroyed my reputation before I could ever destroy hers. And I was young and scared, and I believed her. "How did you escape?" I asked. "I didn't. Not exactly. After about 10 years, her husband found out. He discovered me there. He was horrified. He wanted to call the police. But Margaret, she had him by the throat, too. She threatened him just like she threatened me. But he was older, smarter. He figured out her game." Tommy sat back down on the bed next to me. "They came to an arrangement. Robert helped me get away, but on one condition. I could never tell anyone what had happened. Because if I did, Margaret had insurance, photos, letters, anything she could use to destroy his life, his career, his reputation. He set me up with money, a new identity, a fresh start in another city, and I took it. I was so grateful for the chance to be free, I didn't care about justice or consequences or anything else." "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because I'm dying," Tommy said simply. "I have stage 4 cancer. The doctors give me maybe 6 months. And I can't go to my grave without telling someone the truth, without letting someone know what she did. To me. And I realize now, to how many others. Because, David, I'm not the only one she's hurt. I found other people over the years. Other young people who disappeared around the time I did. Other lives she ruined or destroyed." I felt something cold crystallize inside me. Something hard and terrible and absolutely certain. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I want you to go to the police. I want you to tell them everything I'm telling you. I want you to help them find the evidence. I want Margaret Sutton to finally face consequences for what she's done." Tommy reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a folder. "I've spent the last few years collecting evidence, photos, letters, bank records, medical records from when I finally got away and tried to heal from what happened. Everything you need to make a case." He handed me the folder. It was thick, heavy with secrets. "But I need you to do it," Tommy said, "because I'm not strong enough. I've been running from her for 42 years and I'm so tired, David. I can't face her. I can't be strong anymore, but you can. You're the only person I can trust with this." Outside the motel room, the sun had completely set. The parking lot was dark except for the flickering neon sign that read, "Vacancy." What happened next was a blur of legal procedures, police interrogations, and media scrutiny unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I went to the authorities with Tommy's evidence. I told them everything. And they listened. Because even after 42 years, the evidence was damning. Margaret Sutton was arrested on a Tuesday morning as she was leaving her Pilates class. The mugshot showed a woman in her late 70s, her red hair now dyed a conservative blonde, her expression unreadable. Her lawyer immediately claimed this was a conspiracy, that Tommy was a disgruntled former student making up stories, that there was no proof of anything, but the proof existed. It always does, if you dig deep enough. The bank records showed regular transfers to Margaret's account from shell companies that led nowhere good. The medical records from a private clinic showed that Tommy had been treated for severe anxiety, depression, and complex PTSD, consistent with long-term trauma. The property records showed that the house where Tommy had been held still existed, and when investigators searched it, they found evidence he'd been there, remnants of his clothing, old photographs, a diary he'd kept in those early years of captivity. But the most damning evidence came from Margaret herself, because Margaret, in her arrogance, had kept mementos, letters she'd written to Tommy that she never sent, photographs, documentation of her crimes. She'd kept them in a safety deposit box, and when the police got a warrant to access it, They found a treasure trove of guilt. Margaret Sutton was charged with unlawful imprisonment, extortion, embezzlement, and a dozen other crimes. The trial lasted 4 months. It was covered by every news outlet. My family became famous overnight. Our private pain became public entertainment. Our mother, who was still alive at 86 years old, sat in the courtroom every single day and watched the woman who had stolen her son's life finally answer for what she'd done. Our father had passed away years earlier, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of that injustice. He'd gone to his grave never knowing what happened to Tommy, never getting closure. Margaret Sutton was convicted on all counts. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison. At her age, 78 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. As she was led away from the courthouse, she looked directly at Tommy, who had finally found the courage to attend his trial, and mouthed something. "I'm sorry." Or maybe, "You'll pay for this." I couldn't tell, but it didn't matter anymore what she said or felt. Justice had finally arrived, just incredibly late. Tommy lived long enough to see her sentenced. He died 3 months later, peacefully, in a hospital bed with me holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for believing me." In the months that followed Tommy's death, our family tried to process what had happened. Not just the crime itself, but the 42 years of loss that had preceded it. The birthdays he missed, the holidays he wasn't there for, the graduation of his siblings, the birth of nieces and nephews he'd never met, the simple, ordinary moments of life that he was robbed of. Mom lived for another 3 years after Tommy died. She'd finally gotten her son back, only to lose him almost immediately. But in those 3 years, she seemed different. More at peace somehow. Like she'd finally been given answers to questions that had haunted her for nearly half a century. Like she could rest. But what I've learned from this experience, from living through this tragedy that somehow became a story of justice and truth, is something more complex than just crime was punished or good triumphed over evil. Because the real tragedy wasn't just what Margaret Sutton did. It was that she was able to do it at all for 42 years, in plain sight. Because people don't always report crimes. Because sometimes victims are too afraid. Because sometimes the system fails us. And the deeper tragedy is that there were other victims. Investigators found evidence that Margaret Sutton had done similar things to at least 2 other young people in the decades before she took Tommy. Young people who'd never come forward, who'd never reported what happened, who'd probably spent their entire lives thinking they were alone in what happened to them. But that's where this story takes on a different meaning, because sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. It's about breaking the silence. It's about creating space for other victims to come forward and say, "Me too. She did this to me as well." And they did. After Margaret Sutton's arrest, 3 other victims came forward. The case grew bigger. The investigation went deeper. And Margaret's crimes were revealed to be far more extensive and far more sinister than anyone initially realized. Some people asked me if I felt satisfied by the outcome, if justice truly was served, and the honest answer is complicated. Part of me was satisfied. Seeing Margaret Sutton convicted and imprisoned did bring a sense of closure. My family got answers. We got validation that what happened to Tommy was real and wrong and not his fault. We got to live in a world where she would spend her remaining years paying for what she'd done. But another part of me will never be satisfied, because no amount of jail time can give Tommy back 42 years. No conviction can undo the trauma. No justice can change the fact that he lived most of his adult life hidden away, afraid, broken. What I've learned is that the most important thing isn't the dramatic ending. It's not the conviction or the sentencing or the dramatic courtroom moments. The most important thing is speaking up, is refusing to stay silent, is believing victims when they come forward, even if it takes them 42 years to find the courage. Tommy spent decades in silence, partly because Margaret threatened him, but mostly because he was afraid nobody would believe him. He was afraid of what would happen if he told the truth. And those fears kept him trapped just as effectively as any lock or chain. But when he finally found the courage to call me at 2 a.m., when he finally decided that his truth was more important than his fear, everything changed. For him, for me, for our family, and for the other people who came forward after him. I've also learned that sometimes the people we need to fear most aren't the obvious villains. They're not the criminals we see in movies with clear motives and dramatic flair. Sometimes the people we need to fear most are the ones right in front of us. The authority figures, the teachers, the trusted members of the community, the ones we never suspect because they fit the image of a good person so perfectly. Margaret Sutton wasn't obviously evil. She was charming. She was intelligent. She was respected. She was a teacher who mentored young people. She was a wife. She was a neighbor who brought casseroles to families in need. She was a woman who served on church committees and organized charity fundraisers, and underneath all of that, she was a predator who felt entitled to control other people's lives. The people around her couldn't see it because she didn't fit their image of what a criminal looks like. And that's exactly how she got away with it for so long. So here's what I want you to take from this story. If you suspect someone of doing something wrong, speak up. If someone you know experiences abuse or trauma, believe them. If you hear something that doesn't feel right, investigate it. Don't assume the institutions or authorities will handle it. Don't assume it's not your responsibility, because sometimes it is. Tommy waited 42 years for justice. 42 years of his life were stolen from him. And he wasn't completely certain that anyone would believe him when he finally came forward. He was terrified of being dismissed or disbelieved or blamed for what happened to him. That fear is why these crimes continue. That fear is why perpetrators keep hurting people. That fear is why silence becomes a weapon that's just as effective as violence. But when one person finds the courage to break that silence, everything changes. When one person decides that truth is worth the risk of consequences, other people find courage too. Light spreads, dark corners are exposed, justice becomes possible. It took a phone call at 2 a.m. It took my brother finding the will to reach out after 4 decades. It took him trusting that I would believe him and help him. And that one act of courage, that one moment when Tommy decided he was done being silent, it changed everything. For our family, for the victims who came forward after him, for the future young people who will be safer because Margaret Sutton will never hurt anyone again. This is the real lesson of this story. Not that justice always wins, not that good triumphs over evil. Those things aren't always true. Sometimes criminals go unpunished. Sometimes victims never get answers. Sometimes the truth stays buried forever. But when we choose courage, when we choose to speak, when we choose to believe, when we choose to demand justice, even when it's hard and scary and uncertain, that's when real change happens. That's when the darkness finally recedes. Tommy's story didn't end the way he wanted. He died before he could live a full life. But his story will save other people. His courage will inspire other victims to speak up. His truth will protect future potential victims. And sometimes maybe that has to be enough, because in the end, we don't always get the happy ending we deserve, but we can choose to make sure our pain means something. We can choose to make sure our story matters. Tommy made that choice at 2 a.m. when he called me, and everything changed.